I didn't cry, I didn't argue. I just set down my gardening shears, peeled off my gloves one finger at a time, and walked inside to get my phone, because something in Dana's voice on the porch a moment earlier had told me this text needed my full attention. My sister had just asked me for another loan, the 11th one in 4 years, and this time, out of nothing more than professional habit, I'd asked her to send me a screenshot of the emergency medical bill she said she needed covered. She sent it almost immediately, the way she always did, fast enough that for years I'd mistaken speed for honesty, and in the corner of that screenshot, barely cropped, half covered by the edge of her thumb, was a name that wasn't hers, a name I had never once heard in my entire life. My name is Melissa Foster. I'm 38 years old, and for the past 13 years I've worked as a medical billing auditor, first inside a regional hospital network reviewing claims for fraud, duplicate charges, and reimbursement discrepancies, and for the last 4 years running my own independent practice for smaller clinics that can't afford a full compliance department of their own. My entire career exists because people lie on paper, confidently, assuming no one will ever cross-reference the details closely enough to notice the seams. I built a quiet reputation on noticing exactly that. The small inconsistency between a story and a document, the date that doesn't quite align, the account number altered by a single digit that changes everything if you know where to look. I am precise by training and by temperament both, and for most of my adult life I believed that family was the one place none of that precision should ever apply, that you gave to the people you loved without keeping score, because keeping score was something reserved for strangers, not blood. That belief cracked a little more with every loan I handed my sister over 4 years, and it shattered completely the day I saw a stranger's name printed at the top of a bill she'd sworn, out loud, on the phone, crying, was entirely her own. Dana is 2 years younger than me, and growing up, she was always the one who needed rescuing, from boyfriends who never called back the way they'd promised, from jobs she quit on principle without any backup plan, from landlords she argued with instead of paid, all of it delivered with a kind of breezy, confident recklessness that never seemed to cost her anything, because I was always quietly there in the background absorbing whatever the actual cost turned out to be. Our parents divorced when I was 16 and Dana was 14, and somewhere inside that particular chaos, the moving boxes, the 2 cramped apartments, the holidays split awkwardly down an invisible middle line, I became the responsible one almost by unspoken family default. The one who remembered due dates and filled out financial aid forms while Dana got to stay soft, spontaneous, and endlessly, charmingly irresponsible, protected in some strange unspoken way by the very fact that everyone had already quietly decided who each of us was going to be for the rest of our lives. I didn't resent it back then, or I told myself I didn't. I put myself through community college and then finished a 4-year accounting and healthcare administration degree at night, working full-time at a billing office during the day, riding 2 buses each direction, and I never once complained to Dana about how genuinely brutal that stretch of my 20s actually was, because complaining felt like betraying the role I had quietly assigned myself years earlier, the strong one, the one who didn't need help, the one who gave it instead and never expected anything back in return. I met Greg during that same stretch, in a night class we were both too tired to be sitting through, and he used to tell me, gently, that I treated my own exhaustion like a rounding error, something too small to bother mentioning. He wasn't wrong. It took me years to understand that the habit I'd built with Dana, absorbing costs silently, never naming what it took from me, had quietly become the habit I brought into my marriage too. The loans started small, 4 years ago. $300 for a car repair after her transmission failed on the highway during a storm. $600 for a security deposit on a new apartment after what she described as a genuinely awful breakup with a man I'd met exactly twice. I never set up a repayment schedule, and she never offered one, and somewhere in the slow accumulation of a dozen small favors, we both settled into an arrangement neither of us ever named out loud. I gave, she took, and the unspoken rule between us was that naming it directly would somehow make it uglier than simply letting it continue in comfortable, unexamined silence. My husband Greg raised an eyebrow about it more than once over those years, always gently, never pushing hard enough to force a real argument between us, and I defended her instinctively every single time. Told him he didn't understand what it meant to be someone's older sister, that responsibility like that gets built into your bones so early in life that you eventually stop being able to tell where the obligation ends and the actual love begins. Our Aunt Carol was, through all of it, the one person on my mother's side of the family I trusted completely and without a shred of reservation. Warm, quick with a joke, the kind of aunt who remembered every birthday down to the exact year and always had some gentle opinion about Dana's latest decision, delivered with just enough affection layered over it that it never quite landed as outright judgment. Carol used to squeeze my hand at family dinners, leaning in close enough that only I could hear her, and say, "You're a good sister, Mel, better than she deserves, some days." I used to laugh it off every single time, genuinely warmed by it, never once registering that a compliment delivered that specifically, that consistently, across that many years of dinners and holidays, might be doing something else entirely underneath its warmth. Because admiration and envy, I would eventually learn the hard way, can wear exactly the same face across exactly the same dinner table for decades without a single person at that table noticing the difference. The requests kept coming steadily for 4 years, never enormous individually, always framed as one-time emergencies that somehow, quietly, kept recurring on a rhythm I never let myself actually chart on paper the way I chart everything else. A layoff that stretched 3 long months. A stolen wallet that needed replacing all at once. Cards and ID and everything. A medical thing that needed exactly $800 to cover a copay before some deadline. I gave every single time because Dana would call me crying, genuinely distressed, her voice cracking in a way that felt real because it was real. She was carrying something real the entire time. I would eventually come to understand, just not the thing I had spent 4 years assuming. I calculated, doing the math one long evening after everything finally came apart, sitting out on the back porch with a legal pad, because the house had felt too small for the weight of it, that I had given her just over $31,000 across those 4 years. $31,000 I never once itemized the way I itemize everything else in my professional life, because some part of me had quietly decided that tracking my own sister's needs on a spreadsheet would make me a cold, ungenerous person, instead of simply an honest one, keeping an honest record. The 11th request came on a warm Sunday afternoon while I was out in the garden, kneeling in the dirt along the fence line, trying to get the tomato bed weeded before the heat set in properly. Dana called, voice tight in that familiar way I'd come to recognize instantly, saying she needed $900 immediately for an emergency medical bill tied to a procedure from the week before, and could I send it that same day, because the provider's office was threatening to send the account to collections first thing Monday morning. I told her, out of nothing more than reflexive professional habit, that I could actually move faster if she just forwarded the bill itself, so I could pay the provider directly, rather than routing cash through her account first, the way I sometimes did for elderly clients who trusted me to handle their paperwork end to end. There was a pause on the line, just slightly too long, the kind of pause I've learned to notice across 13 years of interviewing people about claims that don't quite add up. And then she sent the screenshot. The bill was real. The amount matched exactly, down to the cent. But the patient name printed neatly at the top of the document was not Dana Foster. It was a name I had never encountered once in my entire life. Renee Castillo. I didn't say a word to her that afternoon. I told her I'd sent the money, and I did send it, because I needed time before I said anything at all. And, because the first rule I have built an entire career around is deceptively simple. Gather everything before they know you've seen it. The moment someone realizes you're watching closely, the trail goes cold immediately and deliberately, and the trail is the only thing that has ever reliably told me the truth, in 13 years of doing this kind of work for strangers, let alone for my own sister. Over the following 3 weeks, I did, quietly and methodically, the exact thing I do professionally almost every single day, except this time the case file belonged to my own family, and I did it not at my kitchen table, but at the small desk in the spare room I use for client work, where I already had 2 monitors set up and a habit of thinking clearly. I pulled up every screenshot Dana had sent me across 4 years. I had kept most of them without quite admitting to myself why at the time. The same instinct that makes me save every receipt and email in my professional life without ever being asked to. I cross-referenced every visible name, every provider logo, every partial account number I could make out in the corners and margins of the images, working most evenings after Greg had gone to bed, the desk lamp the only light in the room. 6 of the 11 bills, it turned out on close inspection, carried the same name. Renee Castillo. Not Dana's name. Not once. Not on a single one of those 6 documents. I searched the name, and found a woman in her early 30s, a hairdresser, working out of a small salon 2 towns over, with a public social media account, that, across roughly that same 4-year window, documented something slow and quietly devastating. Hospital visit photos with vague captions, a modest GoFundMe campaign that had raised barely a fraction of its already modest goal, posts about rearranging chemotherapy appointments around a shift schedule that clearly couldn't accommodate them properly, comments from coworkers offering to cover her hours. People who believe they will never be found out leave the messiest trails because the story they're maintaining requires them to keep generating evidence, and evidence, once it exists in the world, doesn't simply vanish because someone hopes no one will ever look closely enough to find it. What unsettled me most, sitting at that desk late one night, the same kind of methodical spreadsheets open that I'd use for any legitimate professional case, was that the shape of the story didn't match a simple betrayal at all. Dana wasn't spending $31,000 on herself, not on secret debts, not on some hidden second life of her own, nothing that would have made this a straightforward story about a sister who'd lied for selfish reasons. She was funneling most of it, not all but most, directly toward a stranger's mounting medical bills, methodically, over years, without ever asking for a single dollar for herself in the process. That fact didn't erase 4 years of looking me in the eye and lying about where the money went. But it complicated the entire architecture of what I thought I was uncovering, and I sat with that discomfort for several uneasy days, unable to fully close the case file the way I normally would with a finding this incomplete, before the next piece finally arrived and reframed the whole picture all over again. The deeper twist came from Aunt Carol herself. 3 weeks later, over the phone on a weeknight while I was folding laundry in the hallway, her voice breaking in a way I had genuinely never once heard in 38 years of knowing her. She told me that Renee Castillo was not a stranger to our family at all. She was the daughter Carol had given up for adoption at 19 years old, decades before she ever married my uncle, a secret she had carried completely alone for over 30 years, terrified of what its surfacing would do to a family she'd spent her entire adult life quietly holding together through every other crisis. Dana had discovered the truth by accident, 4 years earlier, while helping Carol clear out an old storage unit ahead of a move, stumbling across a folder of adoption paperwork tucked behind decades of Christmas decorations and old photo albums nobody had opened in years. Rather than expose Carol's secret to the rest of us, Dana had quietly taken it upon herself to help Renee, a half-cousin she'd never grown up knowing existed, had never once met before that day, cover the medical costs of a cancer diagnosis that a hairdresser's modest income and thin insurance simply couldn't sustain on its own. She'd used money she borrowed from me, specifically, because I was the one steady, reliable financial source she had access to, without having to explain any of it to anyone else in the family, and because some part of her, I think, still believed protecting Carol's decades-old secret was worth the cost of my trust in her. Carol confirmed every piece of it through tears, racked with guilt, telling me she had let me believe the worst possible version of my own sister for 4 straight years, rather than confront what she herself had buried 3 decades earlier, before either Dana or I had even been born. Confirmation came a week after that through Renee's oncologist, whom Carol arranged for me to speak with directly, at my own explicit request, so that I could understand precisely where every dollar had actually gone and verify that none of it had been fabricated or exaggerated along the way. He walked me through the full treatment timeline, the costs, the specific gaps insurance hadn't covered across 2 different treatment protocols, in the same flat, credible, documentary tone I use myself whenever I close out a legitimate audit case for a client. And by the end of that call, I had no doubt left at all about what the money had actually paid for. The reveal happened, entirely unplanned, at a family barbecue at Carol's house 2 weeks later, and I wasn't the one who set it in motion. Renee was. She arrived that afternoon, in remission now, meeting for the first time the extended family who had, without fully knowing it, quietly supported her for years, through a chain of loans none of them even knew existed. The yard, my mother told me afterward in vivid, almost cinematic detail over the phone, went utterly silent when Carol stood up in front of everyone near the grill, visibly shaking, and introduced Renee as the daughter she had given up decades earlier. My mother said my uncle's fork stopped completely, halfway to his mouth, suspended there for several long seconds before he set it down without a word. She said one of our cousins actually stood up from her folding lawn chair, hand pressed over her mouth, and had to walk to the edge of the yard for several minutes to compose herself, before coming back to hug Carol without saying anything at all. She said Dana sat quietly through the entire introduction, off to one side near the fence, not taking credit for any of it, simply watching Carol finally set down a weight she had been carrying alone since before either of us had even been born. I met Dana face-to-face the following weekend, not at home but at a small park halfway between our 2 houses, on a bench under a big oak tree where we used to sit as kids waiting for our mother to pick us up from school. It felt like the right kind of neutral ground for what I needed to say. She looked exhausted in a way I hadn't allowed myself to see clearly until that exact moment. Dark circles under her eyes, shoulders pulled in tight like she was bracing for something she'd been expecting for weeks. She apologized. Not for helping Renee, she was very clear and firm about that part, and I respected her for not backing down on it even under pressure. But for lying to me across 4 years about where the money was actually going, for letting me believe she was simply reckless and irresponsible, rather than trusting me with the truth of what she was quietly carrying on someone else's behalf. She asked, quietly, almost afraid of the answer, whether I could understand why she'd chosen to handle it that way, instead of just telling me directly from the very start. I told her the truth. I did understand, more than she probably expected me to, because I know exactly what it feels like to absorb someone else's crisis in total silence rather than ask anyone to help share the weight of it. I'd been doing something similar with her, in a way, for the better part of 2 decades, but understanding why she had lied wasn't the same as pretending the lying hadn't cost me something real of my own. 4 years of quietly resenting her financial choices, 4 years of Greg gently questioning my judgment while I defended a version of my sister that wasn't even accurate to begin with, 4 years of small, private erosion in a relationship I'd assumed was built on complete honesty. I told her that going forward, I needed her to trust me enough to tell me the truth, even the complicated, inconvenient, not entirely hers to tell truth, rather than deciding on my own behalf what I could or couldn't handle hearing. There was no legal settlement in this story, no divorce, no formal paperwork the way these things sometimes conclude in dramatic fashion. What resolved instead was quieter, and in its own way more binding than any document could have been. Dana and I sat down together, later that week at her apartment this time, and worked out an actual structured plan for Renee's remaining medical costs. One that no longer routed invisibly through me alone without my full knowledge and consent. One where Carol finally contributed openly instead of hiding behind Dana as a proxy for her own guilt. And one where I stopped being the unwitting, unacknowledged financier of a secret I hadn't even known I was funding for 4 years. When Dana, tentatively, asked whether we could simply go back to how things had been before all of this, no hard questions, no screenshots, just uncomplicated, easy trust the way it used to feel. I told her, gently but with quiet finality, that we were past the version of before, where I didn't ask any questions at all. That particular chapter of us, I said, was a book we had already finished together, and neither of us needed to keep rereading pages whose ending we already knew by heart. It's been a year and a half now. Renee is doing well, still in remission, and she comes to our family gatherings now simply as herself, not a secret anymore, not a stranger's name folded quietly into the corner of a screenshot. Carol and I have grown closer than we've ever been. Oddly enough, now that there's nothing left unspoken between us that either of us feels the need to hide. Dana and I talk more openly now than we have in years, and for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I'm the only one keeping the ledger balanced between us. And I started something entirely new of my own alongside my regular audit work. A small consulting practice that helps families untangle exactly the kind of quiet, well-intentioned financial secrecy that nearly cost Dana and me our relationship, teaching people, gently and patiently, how to ask for real help honestly, instead of disguising it as something smaller, safer, and easier to hide from the people who love them. Sometimes the greatest betrayal isn't the lie itself. It's what that lie quietly cost the people who trusted you enough never to ask questions in the first place. And sometimes, the truest kind of love isn't the help you give in silence. It's finally trusting someone enough to ask for it out loud, together, in the daylight, where everyone can see exactly what it's costing and why. So tell me, if your own sister had been hiding something like this from you for 4 long years, would you have found it the way I did, quietly, methodically, before ever saying a single word out loud? Or would you have confronted her the very moment something stopped adding up? Let me know in the comments below, and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. And if stories like this one mean something to you, make sure to subscribe. There are more women like me out there, and there are always more stories still left to tell.